The views presented in this program are not meant to express the specific views of Aletheia Bible Fellowship. You are listening to the Vigilance Radio Network.
You are listening to Truth Time with Pastor Monty.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
I do have a very particular set of skills. Skills I've acquired over a very long career.
You want answers? You can't handle the truth.
The problem is having the right worldview and acting upon it. The worldview that gives men and women the truth of what is.
Welcome to Truth Time with Pastor Monty, a show about God, truth, and staying relevant from the perspective of a tenured experience. The Truth Time with Pastor Monty podcast is an external ministry of Aletheia Bible Fellowship of Portland, Oregon, and a member of their Vigilance Radio Network, a part of vigilance.blog, ABF's web portal that provides helpful and interesting resources for the church, local, and at large. If you're interested in today's topics or just staying relevant, go ahead and check out vigilance.blog, or you can check us out on Facebook and Twitter at TruthTimeABF. I am Pastor Josh, your engineer and senior pastor over at ABF, and this is Pastor Monty.
Welcome to Truth Time with Pastor Monty. This is our initial pilot kickoff of this podcast. And we're going to just spend some time today getting to know each other. I'm going to share a little bit about myself and what it is that I bring to the table in regard to looking at things that are happening in today's age. This will probably be the only time that I do this because really not big on bragging about what my background is and what I do. But we're going to be covering a number of different topics, and I will be sharing with you the format for how I'm going to do things. And that format, we will, again, touch on a number of different things. So you may be saying to yourself, well, why is he talking about those types of things? And why, what does he bring, or what's his background that allows him to be able to do that with some authority? Now, millennials, by and large, don't care about those certificates and about what you do and don't do. But this is, while it's directed towards anybody who cares to participate, the reality of it is I'm a baby boomer, and baby boomers love that stuff. They love certificates. They love to be able to say this is the background, and that gives some qualification. So I'm going to do that, and then we're going to get into looking at what Truth Time is really all about, and we'll talk about the segments that are going to be present as this podcast develops. So let's start out with my background. My name is Reverend Monty McGarry, and I just turned 62, so I'm getting up there. I'm old. Yeah, I agree. So just a little bit of background. I grew up in kind of a dysfunctional family. My father was an alcoholic. My mother claimed that she knew Christ, but I really didn't see that at all in her life or how she lived. So I came out of the house, or out of my home, with a lot of dysfunction. They smoked, they drank, we had cigarettes lying around all over. We had alcohol available, whenever we needed to. It was just, it was a very interesting time. It was not unusual for my father to come home, after having worked all day and then drank all night, to jerk us out of bed at, 11 or 12 and rant and rave for the next 2 hours about whatever was bothering him at the time. And that of course, if you've ever dealt with people that are drunks, it was irrational and he was physical, but we lived it. We just dealt with it. That's how we dealt with things. My mother really didn't interfere. She just went in the bedroom and left things alone. So I grew up in kind of a dysfunctional family. I came to know Christ when I was 12, and my conversion experience is really Nothing exciting. Some people have really exciting conversion experiences. My conversion experience was basically somebody sharing with me the truth of God's Word and Jesus Christ. And after listening to it all, they asked me if I wanted to commit my life to Christ. And I said, sure, why not? And that was about the gist of it. So for the next several years, I kind of learned what it was kind of like to be in the church fold, and I went to a church and I connected with some people who were Christians, and they gave me a little bit of an idea of what it was supposed to look like, but it was still rough going. I remember having an experience where I went down to I was friends with an Indian boy American Indian, who his mother was a believer, and I adjusted to eating with them and spending time with them, and so they invited me to come down and spend summer with them, and down on the Indian reservation. And so I went down, it's the Hoopa Reservation in Northern California, and I went down and spent the good part of the summer with them. But she packed me up and brought me home one night, and basically said, you're a tough nut to crack. You're a little hellion, and read me the riot act, because I wasn't quite the Christian boy that I should be, and that would come. But I was still a young believer in Christ. I didn't know what I was doing. So anyway, but I made a decision at that point. I was in the 8th grade at that point. I made a decision that if I was going to be able to live for Christ, I needed to change my circumstances. And so I applied to go to Benson and not go to my district high school, and begin making that transition. And so I grew up going to Benson, which at that point was all male. It wasn't until my senior year in high school that they began allowing a co-ed curriculum. That's another story, but the reality of it is that my life at that point was work, going to church, and school, and that was it. And in those days, because I was poor, which I still am, but in those days, because I was poor, I couldn't afford a car, and my parents were not allowed to let me have a car, and so I got a motorcycle. And so in those days, I rode motorcycle, and I was quite the character to see. Leather boots, leather jacket, lightweight clothes. I literally, in those days, I would have little old ladies cross the street to not have to walk on the same side of the street with me. I was a rough character, but I was getting fed the Word of God and learning how to live for God. After getting out of high school, I went into the military. I went into submarine service, and basically my father was a chef, and so I'd grown up in the restaurant industry, and so I didn't know what else I wanted to do, and certainly I could do that. So I basically became a cook on board nuclear power submarines. Now that's reflective a little bit of who I am, to the extent that I went into submarines for a couple of reasons. First of all, I'm patriotic, so I joined the service not only because I didn't know what to do, but I joined the service because that's that's who we need to do. We need to serve our civil responsibilities, if at all possible. But the reason I chose submarines was because the submarines had the very best food that the military has to offer. And we're talking steaks and lobster and all kinds of stuff. They have special money set aside just to deal with the food issues, because of course you're underwater all the time. So I was aboard a nuclear submarine and spent my time in the service there. and that kind of reflected also my philosophy in regard to military service, from the standpoint that if I was, my brother was in the Army at the time, and my brother told me that he tried to get me to join the Army, and I told him that wasn't going to happen. That happened, and he got upset with me when I answered him why, and essentially because. Well, the reality is, as far as military service, and the different people have different takes, but this is my take, okay? So don't be writing me and telling me, I was in the Army or I was this or I was. Listen, here's the services as they go. First of all, Army, wow, they're shooting at you, okay? You're grunts, essentially. You're out there doing whatever you're being told to do. Air Force, Air Force. They promote them faster. They've got those airplanes. They fly wherever they want. They have fresh food. They have all that kind of stuff, but not really hardcore. Marine Corps, definitely hardcore, but there's a reason why they call them jarheads. Not necessarily that bright. Navy. Oh, let's do Coast Guard first. Coast Guard's interesting. I have a brother who was in the Coast Guard. He was a chief petty officer in the Coast Guard. But here's the thing about Coast Guard. If you get, at least in those days, if you get out of sight of the land, they start to panic. Okay. And then, of course, there's the Navy. In military service, the brains are in the Navy. Air Force, they talk about flying their planes and listen, in the Navy, they not only fly planes, they land them out to sea on an aircraft carrier.
Now I just have to interject here. So this is all coming from the perspective, obviously a biased perspective of somebody who was in the Navy, right?
Oh no! I think
it's not biased.
No, not biased at all.
We obviously respect the service.
We love the service of all of those who serve,
okay,
and in whatever service they choose. It's just that I thought very carefully about which service I was going to choose.
Yes.
But here's the other point. Why did I go into submarines? Not only do they have the best food, but you're not going to be shooting at me unless you can find me. and our submarines are designed so that they run quiet, and they're very difficult to find. So I got out of the service, and a little bit there later, went into, again, trying to figure out what I was going to do with life. An opportunity opened for me to do some missionary work. And so at that point, I was involved in music quite heavily, and I was performing on the radio and doing a lot of different things in Hawaii there as far as music is concerned. And so I decided that I wanted to take that ministry and extend it over into the Philippines. And so I went to the Philippines and basically speaking, spent 3 years in the Philippines doing music and providing that service to the churches that were over there. I had a setup remember, we're talking 50 years ago or so, 40 years ago. Basically speaking, they didn't have the setup they have today, and I had to make a set of tapes with the help of some of my musician friends, so that we created what were in those days called -1s. Which essentially is music on tape, and then you put through a sound system and you sing to it.
It's karaoke.
Highly developed karaoke, but yes, karaoke would be the extension of that today.
Yeah.
But we had to make our tapes on our own, so you couldn't go out and buy them. And so I wrote some of the material. We tried to find some other material. We put everything together, and I put these tapes together, and so I went over to the Philippines. While I was in the Philippines, I got married, and so I've been married now for going on 40 years. I also began going to school in the Philippines, and so began my college career while I was in the Philippines. My wife was just finishing her degree at that point, and she made it clear to me that she had no intentions of marrying somebody who didn't have an education. And so, I agreed that, okay, when we'll talk a little bit about, love and marriage and that type of stuff along the way. But the reality of it is when you're married to somebody, you need to take into consideration what they say. And so I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. So I started school in the Philippines, and then we moved over to back to the United States, where I finished my college career. After finishing my college career, then again, it was, trying to find something where I could pay the bills and make a living. At this time, by the time that I finished my college career, we had 3 children, one of them disabled. So that necessitated me having to be able to, provide, to get a job, and to make it happen. So I was cooking at the time at the Elks Lodge in Oregon City. I was cooking at the time, and once I got my degrees, and I have multiple degrees. I have a degree in religion. Actually, it's a double major, so it's the equivalent of 2 degrees. You just didn't spend the money to get the 2 separate degrees. But it's a double major, religion and social science, and then a master's in religion. And once I finished my degrees, I said, I got all this education. I don't need to be cooking anymore. And so I quit. And it took me about 6 months to find work. And what I found work doing was, I figured, well, like I said, somebody's got to want me. We tried the church route first, but, in those days, not so much today, I don't think, but in those days, everybody thought that if you were going to be involved in ministry, that you had to start out as a youth pastor. And so, I tried that once or twice, but I'm not really a youth pastor kind of guy. And that didn't work out very well. And so we were looking for other opportunities, and they had a job opening down at the Internal Revenue Service for a reader. And now, actually, it wasn't a reader. It was a person it was a forms order clerk. And in those days, if you wanted to order forms from the Internal Revenue, what you would do is you would leave your message on a tape, and then the forms would be sent to you. Well, my job was to take those messages off the tape and to mark what it is that you wanted, and then to send it out.
So you were an answering machine.
Really archaic. Well, I wasn't I was taking information off the answering machine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, like I said, archaic. But remember, we're talking, over 30 years ago. So things have changed immensely. I was a grade 2. So different opportunities presented themselves, and over the years, I worked myself up to be a tax technician specializing in complex tax law, and then I ended my career with the Internal Revenue Service after 28 years, 15 years of it being a senior field collector for the Internal Revenue Service. So I dealt not only with specialized tax law, but I also collected money from people who were delinquent.
So you were the man. You're like, I'm not saying that in the positive sense. I mean it pejoratively. You were like the tax man cometh.
Oh yeah, definitely. My cases, when I ended up my career as a grade 12, so I went from a grade 2 to a grade 12 in that 28 years, and grade 12 cases, you're basically looking at dollar amounts that can be anything, but essentially run $50,000 to $1 million, just depending on what it is that you're dealing with. And my job was to go out and work those cases. So
do you, I mean, obviously we're not expecting you to talk about it, but did you ever shut down anybody famous?
Oh, no. Most, and I wouldn't be able to talk about it, but no, most people that I dealt with were people that were in over their heads.
Mhm.
So they basically just didn't know what they were doing.
But they could be famous and in over their heads too.
They could be. But in Oregon, we don't have many of those people around. California, yeah, quite a bit. But
Right.
Oregon, we don't have many of those people around. So, so by way of just sharing a little bit about my background, you've already learned a couple things. You've learned, first of all, that I have 3 children. All of them are grown. I have 6 grandchildren. 3 children, all of them are grown and are successful in their own right in how it is that they're living their lives. They have incorporated themselves into society. I've been married for close to, and are being productive, I might add.
I was snickering at the way you said society. You're like, society.
Yeah, yeah. So not only are they productive, but they are learning how to continue in that process as God opened up opportunities for them. I've been married for almost 40 years. So not only married for almost 40 years to the same woman, but cross-culturally married at that. So having to deal with all the nuances of culture, and that's always a challenge, and it's a challenge both ways. And so what I would share in that regard, and we'll talk more about marriage at a different time, but that's one of the subjects we're gonna we'll be able to deal with as I describe to you what this is really going to be all about. So I got not many people today. There are a few, but not many people today can claim 40 years of marriage and still going strong, and having to deal with all the stuff that's involved with that. So you've learned that. You've learned that I have an education, and that I have that background. I would stipulate that one of the reasons that, again, when I do things, I think about what I'm going to do. So when I was looking at getting an education, one of the things that I seriously looked at was what was happening in society even back then, and looked at pastors and how pastors were dealing with things, and quickly determined that most of the schools today, and it is true even today, but most of the schools prepare individuals theologically for the issues that they're going to face, but do not even begin to prepare them for the cultural and sociological issues that they face in pastoring a congregation or the greater society that is affected by that.
So when you're saying most of the schools, you're talking specifically about most seminaries.
Yes, oh yeah.
I mean, you're not talking about Clackamas Community College.
Clackamas Community College doesn't prepare ministers.
You take.
They have a fascinating religion course, but
yeah, you take your religion course.
It's synchronistic and doesn't hold true to what it should be. But at any rate, my point is that the reason I have a degree in social science is because I considered the importance of understanding the dynamics of society and how pastors have to interact with that.
Did you get that from, was there anybody in particular that inspired you to look more at the social dynamic?
Not really. I mean, part of the issue was that I was a missionary for the Philippines in 3 years. And so I was already, and I lived cross-culturally. So I was already made aware of the dynamics. But when I would observe missionaries in the Philippines that were coming through the normal outlets that missionaries, would come through, it always fascinated me about how missionaries conducted their business. And part of that, to a large degree, there were anomalies, but to a large degree, most missionaries live in a compound. And are protected from
They're not immersed in the culture.
No, they are not. And
weren't at the time anyway.
And not only that, but the Jesus that they were presenting was not necessarily a Jesus of Scripture, but was a Jesus of white society. And and so.
So you were concerned about Jesus' privilege?
Well, yes, to a degree. I mean, if you're going to introduce Christ into another culture, then you have to look at the practices of that culture and determine whether it's consistent or not with what Scripture says we should be doing. You should not be forcing your culture as a representative of Christianity onto another culture and expect them to have to adapt that or adopt that.
Right.
An example of that would be when missionaries would go over to India. Oftentimes, they would have difficulty with the fact that in India it's perfectly okay to have multiple wives, and people who would come to Christ would have multiple wives, and the church would go, no. See, if you accept Christ, you've got to you can only have one wife.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a problem. That's a problem because...
How do those men remain faithful to the wives they already had?
That's correct. And what about the children they're responsible for?
Right.
And how do you deal with those types of cultural issues?
Right. Well, not to mention the precedent that Paul and the apostles made in saying that people didn't have to be circumcised and didn't have to worry about the meat laws. And yeah.
Yeah, so the challenge so I understood that those challenges existed. And so that's one of the reasons I took a second degree in social sciences, is so that I would be prepared to be able to address some of those issues. And now the reality of it is I never wanted to be a pastor. I didn't see myself as being a pastor. I saw myself more as being an educator and of being involved in providing seminars and doing those types of things. My master's degree was a master of religion with an emphasis on Christian apologetics, cult and occult teachings. So essentially, nice. I'm an apologist, specializing in what people teach and what they believe or say they believe. And so I was looking to go out and do seminars and help to try to educate the general church population a little bit about all the stuff that was going on, even at that time. At that time, we had the New Age movement going on strong, and the introduction of the occult through the New Age movement into society. A lot of people kind of confused about all the things that were going on. So, but as it worked out, that wasn't God's plan. God's plan was for me to be a pastor. Which is interesting because that's not, and I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, but that's not really where my heart was. Mm-hmm. That's not what I had intended. But,
right, you're not saying that you didn't have a heart for ministry, right. But as we both know, being pastors, shepherding, which is, maintaining a flock, is different than being an expert,
yes.
What do we call a specialist in a particular field? Completely different things. One does not necessitate the other. So.
Right, and my strengths are not necessarily towards shepherding. My strengths are more towards being true to the Word of God and being able to discern truth and present it in such a way that it's understandable. That's the reason why many people would say to me, how can you possibly work for the Internal Revenue,
right,
and be a pastor at the same time? Because while I was working for the Internal Revenue, I was a tent maker. So the church that I pastored was poor, and they couldn't afford to pay me. They could barely afford to be able to pay me a housing allowance, let alone a salary that I could support my family off of. So I was a tent maker.
Tent maker is an internal term in ministry for a bivocational person.
Yes.
Somebody who has two vocations because the church can't afford it.
Right. So I worked full time for the Internal Revenue, and then I also worked full time at the church shepherding this flock. So, but people would ask me, they'd say, well, how can you possibly work for the Internal Revenue and still be a pastor? I mean, isn't there a conflict there? I said, no, not really, because you got to think of it this way: is that taxes are esoteric in nature. They're difficult to understand. They're complex, and theology is esoteric in nature. again, difficult, complex to understand. So my job as a tax technician, which before I became a collector, which was much more exciting, but before I became a collector, I was a tax technician, and I would sit on the phone all day and explain to people the complexities of tax law. And I dealt with complex tax law. So, is that not what I'm doing as a theologian? I'm taking complex, I'm translating it into something simple, something that can be usable for people to understand. So I really believe that, you can, it is compatible, but you have to understand it within that context. So I pastored a church, and basically my training in social science helped me a great deal, because I took a church that was dying. It was literally dying. The pastor that had it before me took a church, a strong church of around 120 people, and dwindled it down to about 15 or 20 people, and announced one day that God told him it was time to leave. I'm like, really?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know the complete circumstances of that, but yeah, it's pretty suspicious how he left.
Yeah, so what we were left with is old people. I mean, really, not old people like me. Really,
and you're
people.
like, what, 80?
I said earlier, I'm 62.
That's true.
Focus, Josh.
Just checking your memory.
But
it was people that were like 80s or
and
90s.
Yeah, and they were dying. I mean, so the first several years, it was just working with them to provide for their needs as dying individuals. But the dynamic that is there is that how do you take a church that is dying and has a particular way of dealing with things and transition that into a younger body and into a vibrant church? And my skill set in social science and my understanding of culture and those things became very helpful in my being able to do that. So I was a pastor for 20 plus years, actively pastoring a church while working full time. So that gives you another idea. Then after I retired from the Internal Revenue Service, it's been 3 years now, into April 1st of 2014. My own personal little humor there. Then I had to find something else to do, because I also had to be able to make enough money to provide for my needs. So because no matter what they tell you, once everybody gets their cut, you really don't get that much money for retirement. And I really think, really sadly, when I think about those individuals that I know that are working right now, for example, or people that didn't make the type of money that I made, like clerks and various jobs. The average government job is at a grade 6 or 7.
And that means?
That means that they're not paid that much.
Okay.
So that means that when they retire, they're going to, for their 20 plus years of service, they're going to get less than $1,000 a month.
Well, they better move from Portland then.
How can you live on that kind of money?
You got to go. You got to go somewhere else.
Yeah, it's
got to go to the Midwest.
It's terrible. So anyway, but I retired and I started looking for other things to do, and I thought it'd be fun to drive bus. So I got a CDL, so I have a CDL that I keep active. I drove for a little bit commercially, and some things happen because life happens. And now what I'm doing is I'm driving for Lyft. And for somebody who's retired, for my circumstance, that works really well. And the other thing that I do is I'm a college professor. Now, the irony of that...
Way to gloss over it. You're like, and I drive for Lyft. I'm a college professor. It's like you just spit it out there like the one is more important than the other. Clearly, the college professor is the one we want to talk about.
Well, the college professor, my wife, when she talks to people about what I do now, there are certain individuals in certain cultures who believe that menial work is not important. Not to generalize, but I'm just saying that that's the reality of life. So college professor clearly sounds better than drive for Lyft.
Mm-hmm.
But I would have to point out that Lyft has its standards, and you still have to meet those standards. And I use psychology, even in driving for Lyft, in order to keep those standards high. But for me, I enjoy driving. You know, there are two things that are required in life to enjoy driving. A lot of people don't.
Okay.
I know you're not thrilled.
Let's hear it. The
But-
two things required in life.
Well, you got to have a decent car
Okay.
that you can trust in,
Right.
and you got to have a killer sound system.
Okay. I agree with that.
and those are the two things. So if you got a nice car and you got a killer sound system, you're set. So, you know, when I was working as a revenue officer, I would normally drive probably between 12 and 1,500 miles a month,
Just from the city to the beach.
going to the coast, and because I covered the Coast Range and what have you. And so it's not unusual for me to drive. I like driving, and so for me, I find it relaxing, and so it's, you know, it's a good time for me. But I'm a college professor. I teach. I'm an adjunct professor at Warner Pacific College.
Which is actually your
That is my alma mater.
alma mater, yeah.
Alma mater, and I teach. Ironically, very funny. Even though my degrees and experience are in religion and social science, I teach business.
Because you have a lifetime of experience in
Because
business.
my background in business.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I teach business aside from teaching. So I also, when I retired from the Internal Revenue, I also wrote a book in regard to how to set up a business and the things you need to consider. And so I'm an author. I'm a speaker. I do conferences, seminars, and those types of things. People, you know, not a lot, but I do enough to keep me busy.
And just to clarify, when you said you were retired, you retired not just from the IRS, but also from the position of senior elder.
That is correct. So I'm retired from both, and the reason I'm retired from being senior elder is, of course, the church continues to go through a transition, and the pastoral team, which is in place currently, is better equipped to deal more with the cultural changes which are present than I am.
So just a matter of clarification for our audience. So you talked about pastoring a church before. That church was that church became what now is Aletheia Bible Fellowship.
That is correct.
And so for those of you, you know, who listen to the Vigilance Radio Network, ABF, as we call it, is what runs this podcast. It's a ministry of ABF. I'm the senior pastor at ABF, and for clarification's sake, Monty is actually my father. But yeah, so he is considered an elder emeritus at the church. So he's actually retired from the church in the elder position. But anyway, I just wanted to make that clarification so people understood. Yeah, so you retired from ministry, and then you went on to this second or third or fourth portion of your life, you know. And now you are an adjunct professor at your alma mater, and there we have it.
Right. So I mean, so recently, another adjustment in my life. Listen, time. You know, life is about change. And the real issue is how we adapt to that change determines whether we're going to be successful or not. So by some people's ideas, I would not be successful because I'm not wealthy. But that's not my idea of success. My idea of success is to understand that life is about change. How do you position yourself to make the choices that you need to, so that the changes that are taking place, you're able to be productive in those changes and not counterproductive. And so from that standpoint, I would see myself as very successful, and that's one of the reasons why I don't deal with legacy problems or wear a gold chain or go through midlife crisis. Because I'm just not there. I can look back, and whenever the Lord decides to bring me home, I don't have to worry about what my legacy is going to be, because I've been careful.
Right, you're not facing generativity issues.
No, there are other adjustments that I've had to make in regard to getting old. For example, I have to wear suspenders because I can't keep my pants up because I don't have any hips. I mean, and I look around, and when I was younger, I'd look at these old farts running around with suspenders and go, "What's with that?" See, now I understand. Because for the last year, I've been pulling my pants up every time I try to walk. And finally I said, you know what? I wore my belt as tight as I could, but I got no hips, so that I can't keep my pants up.
So back on track. So you were talking about, like, on a personal level, you've made a lot of progress in this way and gone through many changes. But one of the things that we've noticed at ABF, like in ministry, is that there are a lot of people in your age bracket who are having generativity issues. Not so much that they aren't accomplished in life, but that those accomplishments, there's a question as to what they amount to on a larger level, and that's one of the reasons why we want to do the show, right?
Yeah, exactly, and I think it's important from that standpoint. So when we talk, so that gives you just a little bit. I've got a lot of background in a lot of areas, and we're going to bring part of that into the podcast and talk about those things as we progress. Let's talk for a second about truth, because it's called Truth Time with Pastor Monty, and what that really means is that we're going to be talking about things in a truthful manner, and there's a lot of people going around spouting that they're telling you the truth when in essence they're lying to you, or they're misrepresenting truth. So you're going to find that this is a little bit philosophical, but you're going to find that probably as I take time to share with you, that I have a lot of little nuances and philosophies that have protected me through life, and so that's who I am. And what I believe, that to understand truth is that element which is present that can withstand the test of time. It can withstand the test of time. It can withstand scrutiny. It can withstand examination. So that when everything is said and done on a particular issue, so no matter what we're talking about, whether we're talking about raising children or religion or politics or whatever we're talking about, truth is that element that has been presented and has been able to stand the test of time.
So, and I assume that a part of that then is to say that it's universal?
It is universal, and more importantly, it's foundational.
Okay, something you can build off of.
Well, yeah, and so if you build your life off of an untruth or off of a fabrication, then there are going to be consequences which are attached to that, because it's a false foundation. In the same way, if you work to build your life on truth and are able to understand those, because again, remember, that ties into what I said earlier in regard to choice and consequence. So they all kind of work together, but truth is very important. And what we have happening in society today, many people don't understand the problems that we face in society. In fact, I listen to people all the time, and they say to me, they respond to some of the stuff that's happening, and we'll talk about this just a little bit, but they respond by saying, I just don't understand how that could be happening. Well, hey, the reality of it is, over the last 70 years, we've had a massive sociological, philosophical change take place in our society. And we've gone from the belief that truth is objective and can be relied upon, to truth is subjective, and you make up your own truth, to everything revolves around me anyway. And that's kind of where we're at today. So what I view truth as, again, is that it's foundational, that it can be examined, that it will prove itself over time, and that it can be relied on. And it's necessary in order to be successful in life. You must have truth as a foundation.
Well, even in the way that you said that, like, it shows the, I guess, the inherent nature of how we've been programmed. Like you just said, how I view truth. But we both know that you don't believe that it's just how you view truth, right? You know what I mean?
I know. Yes, I know.